Sarah's boots crunched against the gravel outside street. Mary's church. Each step a rebellion against the lie that had buried her alive. They said she was dead, her family, her town, the people who'd known her since she was a child, but here she was, heart-pounding, clutching a folder of proof that would unravel their cruel deception. Beside her, Emily's hand squeezed hers, a lifeline in a world that had tried to erase them both. In the small town of Willow Creek, Tennessee, where gossip spread faster than wildfire, Sarah Thompson had been declared dead. Not by accident, not by tragedy, but by her own family's hand. They'd held a funeral, mourned her in public, and buried an empty casket, all because she loved a woman. The town had whispered for weeks, their words sharp as knives: sinner, unnatural, gone astray. Her parents, pillars of the local church, had decided death was easier than disgrace. They'd forged documents, spread lies, and convinced the community that Sarah had died in a car accident in Nashville. But Sarah wasn't dead. She was here, alive, and ready to confront the betrayal that had stripped her of everything. 2 years ago, Sarah had been a bright-eyed 23-year-old, working at the local library, her laughter a familiar sound in Willow Creek's quiet streets. She'd grown up under the weight of her parents' expectations: church every Sunday, modesty in all things, a future mapped out with a husband and children. But then she met Emily Harper, a 24-year-old artist who'd moved to town to escape her own ghosts. Emily's wild blonde curls and fearless spirit had drawn Sarah in like a moth to a flame. Their first kiss, stolen behind the library's stacks, had felt like the world cracking open, revealing colors Sarah had never known existed. Their love grew in secret, hidden in late-night drives and whispered promises. But secrets in Willow Creek never stayed buried. When Sarah's mother found a letter Emily had written, filled with words of love too raw to misinterpret, the fallout was swift. Her parents called it an abomination. They demanded she repent, leave Emily, and fix herself. Sarah refused. She chose love over shame, and her family chose to erase her. They told me I was dead to them, Sarah said, her voice trembling as she and Emily stood outside the church. The folder in her hands held bank statements, forged death certificates, and emails, evidence of her family's elaborate lie. But they didn't stop there. They made the whole town believe it. Emily's eyes, bright with anger and love, met Sarah's. We're here now. You're not invisible anymore. Let's do this. The church doors loomed ahead, the faint hum of hymns seeping through. Inside, Sarah's funeral was in full swing, a mockery of grief orchestrated by her parents. The plan was simple but terrifying: walk in, expose the truth, and reclaim her life. Sarah's heart raced as she imagined her mother's face, her father's stern disapproval, the gasps of neighbors who believed she was gone. She wasn't just fighting for herself, she was fighting for every kid in Willow Creek who'd been told their love was wrong, for every heart silenced by fear. As they stepped toward the entrance, Emily slipped a small, folded note into Sarah's pocket. Read it later, she whispered. When you need to remember why we're here. Sarah nodded, her resolve hardening. The folder felt heavier now, not just with paper but with the weight of everything she'd lost, and everything she was about to take back. The church was packed. Rows of familiar faces bowed in false mourning. A portrait of Sarah, taken at her high school graduation, sat on an easel beside a wreath of white lilies. Her mother, Ellen, stood at the podium, her voice thick with crocodile tears. Our Sarah was taken too soon, she said, dabbing her eyes. We pray she's found peace. Sarah's stomach churned. The hypocrisy was suffocating. She glanced at Emily, who gave her a nod, and together they stepped through the doors. The organ music faltered. Heads turned. A collective gasp rippled through the room as Sarah Thompson, declared dead, walked into her own funeral. "Mom," Sarah said, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "I'm not dead. And I've got the receipts to prove it." She held up the folder, her hand steady despite the storm inside her. Whispers erupted, eyes darting between Sarah and her parents. Ellen's face went pale. Her father's jaw tightened. And the pastor froze mid-prayer. Emily stood at Sarah's side, her presence a quiet strength. This wasn't just a confrontation, it was a reckoning. Sarah took a deep breath, her voice rising. "You told this town I died because you couldn't accept who I love. You lied to everyone here. To your friends. To your God. But I'm alive. And I'm not ashamed." The room was a powder keg, and Sarah had just lit the fuse. Her mother's composure cracked. Her father stood, his face a mask of fury, and the congregation waited, torn between shock and curiosity. Sarah opened the folder, ready to lay bare the truth. She'd been erased, but she was here now, and she wasn't leaving until every lie was exposed. Sarah's voice echoed in the church, each word a hammer striking the fragile facade her family had built. The congregation sat frozen, their eyes darting between her and the podium where her mother stood, clutching a handkerchief like a shield. Her father, Robert, stepped forward, his face a storm of rage and shame. But Sarah didn't flinch. She'd spent too long hiding, too long bending to their will. "Not anymore. You forged a death certificate," Sarah said, pulling the first document from her folder. She held it up, the paper trembling slightly in her grip. "You told the bank I was gone, drained my savings, and convinced everyone I died in a crash that never happened." She turned to the crowd, her voice steady now. "They didn't just disown me. They erased me because I love Emily." A murmur rippled through the pews. Some faces softened with sympathy, others hardened with judgment. Mrs. Carter, the librarian who'd mentored Sarah, covered her mouth in shock. Mr. Hayes, the town mechanic, leaned forward, his brow furrowed. Sarah's heart pounded. She knew these people, had grown up with them, but their reactions were a gamble. Would they see her truth? Or would they cling to the lies? Ellen's voice broke the tension, shrill and defensive. "You brought this on yourself, Sarah. You chose sin over family. We did what we had to do to protect this town's values." "Protect?" Sarah's laugh was bitter, cutting. "You held a funeral to protect your reputation. You lied to everyone here. And for what? To pretend I never existed." Emily stepped closer, her hand brushing Sarah's arm. "They're listening. Sarah. Keep going." Sarah nodded, pulling out the next document, an email chain between her parents and a lawyer in Nashville. "You paid someone to fake my death," she said, her voice rising. "You told them I was a danger to the family name. Here's the proof." She passed the papers to Mrs. Carter in the front row, who took them with trembling hands. The church was a pressure cooker now, the air thick with tension. Robert stormed down the aisle, his voice booming. "Enough of this. You're not welcome here, Sarah. You made your choice when you turned your back on God." "God?" Sarah's eyes blazed. "You don't get to speak for God. You don't get to decide who's worthy of love." She turned to the congregation, her voice softer but no less fierce. "I loved my family. I loved this town. But they couldn't love me back, not the real me. So they buried an empty casket and called it salvation." A woman in the back stood up. "Mrs. Delgado, the high school art teacher who'd always encouraged Sarah's creativity. "Is this true, Ellen?" she asked, her voice shaking. "Did you really do this to your own daughter?" Ellen's face crumpled, but she didn't answer. Robert grabbed her arm, whispering something harsh. But the damage was done. The congregation was fracturing, some still loyal to the Thompsons, others questioning everything they'd been told. Sarah felt the weight of their stares, a mix of pity, anger, and confusion. She'd known this moment would be hard, but nothing prepared her for the raw ache of standing in front of people she'd once called home, begging them to see her. Emily leaned in, her voice a whisper. "You're doing it, Sarah. They're hearing you." Sarah pulled out the next piece of evidence, a bank statement showing her parents had accessed her account after her death. "You took everything I had," she said, her voice breaking for the first time. "My savings, my future, my name. But you couldn't take my truth." The pastor, Reverend Michaels, finally spoke, his voice hesitant. "Sarah, this is a lot to process. If what you're saying is true, it's a grave sin. But we need to understand." "Understand?" Sarah interrupted, her eyes locking on his. "You preached love every Sunday. But where was that love when my family decided I was better off dead than gay? Where was it when this town believed them without question?" The room fell silent. Even Robert's bluster faded, his face pale as he realized the tide was turning. Sarah felt a spark of hope, fragile but real. She wasn't just exposing her parents, she was exposing a system that let fear and prejudice fester. Mrs. Carter stood, still holding the documents, her voice firm. "I've known Sarah since she was a girl. She's no sinner. She's brave. And she's here, fighting for her truth. We owe it to her to listen." A few heads nodded, and Sarah's chest tightened with something like gratitude. She glanced at Emily, whose eyes shone with pride. The note in Sarah's pocket felt warm, a reminder of the love that had carried her this far. She wasn't alone. Not anymore. But the fight wasn't over. Robert's voice cut through again, colder now. "You're tearing this family apart, Sarah. You'll regret this." Sarah met his gaze, unflinching. "The only thing I regret is believing you'd ever love me for who I am." She turned back to the congregation, ready to lay out the rest of her evidence. The truth was her weapon, and she was far from done wielding it. The church felt like a battlefield, the air charged with the weight of Sarah's words and the congregation's divided hearts. She stood at the center, folder in hand, her breath steadying as she faced her parents' defiance. Emily's presence beside her was an anchor, grounding her against the storm of emotions threatening to pull her under. Sarah opened the folder again, pulling out a photocopy of a newspaper obituary, her obituary, printed in the Willow Creek Gazette. The words "tragically taken" and "beloved daughter" mocked her from the page. "This was in the paper 2 months ago," she said, holding it up for all to see. "My parents paid for this. They wrote it, knowing I was alive, knowing I was just a few hours away in Nashville, trying to rebuild my life." The congregation stirred, whispers growing louder. Mrs. Delgado, still standing, shook her head. "Ellen, Robert, how could you? She's your daughter." Ellen's face twisted, a mix of guilt and desperation. "We did it for her soul," she said, her voice breaking. She was lost, living in sin with her. She pointed at Emily, her finger trembling. Emily stiffened but didn't back down. "My name is Emily Harper," she said, her voice clear and strong. "And I love your daughter. That's not a sin. It's the best part of my life. A few gasps echoed, but others' younger faces in the crowd, kids Sarah had gone to school with, looked at Emily with something like respect. Sarah's heart swelled. Emily wasn't just her partner. She was her courage. Her home. Sarah turned to the congregation, her voice softer now, pleading. I didn't come here to shame my parents. I came here because I want my life back. I want to walk down Main Street without being a ghost. I want to love who I love without being erased. She pulled out another document, a letter from her bank, confirming her account had been closed by her parents using a forged power of attorney. They didn't just lie about my death, she said. They stole my money, my identity, everything I'd worked for. They thought they could bury me and move on. But I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere. Reverend Michaels stepped forward, his face troubled. Sarah, these are serious accusations. If what you're saying is true, it's not just a family matter, it's a crime. It is a crime, Sarah said, her voice steady. And I'm not the only one they've hurt. How many other kids in this town are hiding who they are because they're afraid of this? She gestured to the church, to the pews filled with people she'd known her whole life. How many have been told their love is wrong, their lives are wrong, just because they don't fit your mold? The room was quiet now, her words sinking in. Sarah saw tears in Mrs. Carter's eyes, saw Mr. Hayes shift uncomfortably. Even the pastor looked shaken, his hands clasped tightly. Robert broke the silence, his voice low and venomous. You're twisting this, Sarah. You're making us the villains when you're the one who chose this path. Chose? Sarah's voice cracked, raw with pain. I didn't choose to love Emily, it's who I am. The only choice I made was to stop hiding. And you couldn't handle that. So you buried me instead. Emily's hand found hers again, a quiet reminder of their shared strength. Sarah took a breath, pulling out the final piece of evidence, a handwritten note from her mother, found in the family's attic when Sarah had snuck back to retrieve her things. The note was addressed to her aunt, confessing the plan to save the family by declaring Sarah dead. This is your handwriting, Mom, Sarah said, holding it up. You wrote this 2 days after you kicked me out. You planned this from the start. Ellen's knees buckled, and she sank into a pew, her face buried in her hands. The congregation was no longer whispering, they were staring, some with horror, others with dawning understanding. Sarah felt the shift. The moment the town began to see her not as a sinner, but as a daughter betrayed. Mrs. Carter stood again, her voice trembling but firm. I've heard enough. Sarah, you've got my support. This isn't right. And it's not what this town should stand for. A few others nodded slowly at first, then more confidently. A young man in the back, Tommy, who'd been Sarah's lab partner in high school, stood up. I'm with you, Sarah, he said. I know what it's like to hide who you are. You're not alone. Sarah's throat tightened, tears threatening to spill. She hadn't expected allies. Not here. Not now. But the tide was turning, and she could feel it. Robert's voice cut through, weaker now. This is a private matter. You're airing our family's business in front of everyone. No, Sarah said, her voice resolute. You made it public when you held this funeral. You don't get to hide now. She turned to the congregation, her heart pounding but her purpose clear. I'm not asking for your approval. I'm asking for my life back. And I'm asking you to think about what love means, not just for me, but for everyone in this town who's been told they don't belong. The church was silent. the weight of her words settling over the room. Sarah knew this wasn't the end. Her parents wouldn't back down easily, and the town was still divided. But she'd taken the first step, and with Emily by her side, she was ready for whatever came next. The silence in the church stretched, heavy with the weight of Sarah's truth. She stood tall, the folder now empty, its contents scattered among the congregation like seeds of a reckoning. Emily's hand remained in hers, a steady warmth against the chill of her parents' glares. Ellen sat slumped, her face hidden, while Robert's eyes burned with a fury that no longer intimidated Sarah. She'd faced their worst and was still standing. Reverend Michaels cleared his throat, his voice uncertain but loud enough to draw attention. Sarah, Emily, this is unprecedented. We need time to process, to verify these documents. But I promise you, we'll get to the bottom of this. Sarah nodded, but her focus wasn't on the pastor. It was on the faces in the crowd, some familiar, some strangers now, all grappling with the truth she'd laid bare. She saw doubt in some, support in others, and fear in too many. This wasn't just about her family anymore. It was about Willow Creek, about the unspoken rules that had suffocated so many for so long. Mrs. Delgado spoke up, her voice cutting through the tension. Reverend, with all due respect, this isn't just about verifying documents. This is about what we stand for as a community. Sarah's alive, and her family tried to erase her. We can't just sit here and pretend that's okay. A murmur of agreement rippled through the pews, stronger now. Sarah's heart lifted, but she knew better than to trust it fully. Change didn't come easy in a town like this. Robert seized the moment, his voice booming. This is a house of God, not a stage for your rebellion. Sarah, you're confusing these good people, dragging them into your mess. My mess. Sarah's voice was sharp, unwavering. You held a funeral for me, Dad. You told everyone I was dead because you couldn't face who I am. If anyone's confused, it's because of your lies. The congregation shifted, some nodding, others whispering. Tommy, the young man who'd spoken earlier, stepped into the aisle. I've got something to say, he said, his voice trembling but determined. Sarah's not the only one who's been hiding. I'm gay. I've been scared to say it because of people like you, Mr. Thompson. But I'm done being afraid. The room erupted in gasps and murmurs. Sarah's eyes met Tommy's, and she saw the same fear and resolve she'd felt when she first told Emily she loved her. She gave him a small nod, a silent thank you for his courage. Emily squeezed Sarah's hand, whispering, "You're starting something bigger than you know." Sarah felt it to a spark, fragile but growing. But before she could respond, her mother stood, her face streaked with tears. "Sarah, you don't understand," Ellen said, her voice breaking. "We thought we were saving you. We thought if we could start over, you'd come back to us. The real you. The real me." Sarah's voice softened, not with forgiveness but with clarity. "The real me is standing right here, Mom. The real me loves Emily. The real me doesn't need saving." Ellen's sob echoed in the quiet church, and for a moment, Sarah felt a pang of pity. But it was fleeting. Her mother's tears couldn't undo the years of rejection, the lies, the theft of her identity. Mrs. Carter, still clutching the documents, stood again. "I'm taking these to the sheriff," she said, her voice firm. "This isn't just a family dispute. It's fraud. Maybe worse. Sarah deserves justice." A few voices called out in support, and Sarah's chest tightened with hope. But Robert wasn't done. You're turning this town against us, he said, his voice low and dangerous. You'll destroy everything we've built. No, Dad, Sarah said. Her eyes locked on his. You did that when you decided I wasn't your daughter anymore. The pastor raised his hands, trying to restore order. Enough. We'll reconvene tomorrow after I've spoken with the authorities and reviewed these documents. Sarah. Emily. You have my word, we'll address this. Sarah nodded. But she wasn't naive. The pastor's promise was a start. But Willow Creek was a small town. And change was slow. She and Emily turned to leave, the weight of the moment settling over them. As they stepped outside, the cool evening air hit Sarah's face. And she pulled the note Emily had given her from her pocket. It read, "You are enough. Always." Tears stung Sarah's eyes as she looked at Emily, who smiled softly. "You were incredible in there," Emily said. "You didn't just fight for yourself. You fought for all of us." Sarah pulled her close, their foreheads touching. "I couldn't have done it without you." As they walked to their car, the church door swung open behind them. Tommy ran out, his face flushed. "Sarah, wait," he said, catching his breath. I want to help. Whatever you're doing next, I'm in." Sarah smiled, a real one this time. "Thank you, Tommy. We're just getting started." The three of them stood in the parking lot, the church's shadow looming behind them. Sarah knew the road ahead would be brutal. Her parents wouldn't back down, and the town was still divided. But for the first time, she felt the stirrings of a community that might just fight with her. The next morning, Willow Creek buzzed with the kind of tension that only a small town could muster. Word of Sarah's confrontation at the church had spread, twisting and morphing with each retelling. Some called her a hero, others a troublemaker. Sarah and Emily sat in a diner on Main Street, the folder of evidence now with the sheriff, who'd promised a full investigation. The weight of the previous night clung to Sarah. But so did the spark of hope Tommy's words had ignited. The diner was half empty, its regulars casting cautious glances their way. Sarah sipped her coffee, her eyes scanning the room. "They're staring," she murmured to Emily. "Let them," Emily said, her voice steady. "They're not staring because they hate you. They're staring because you shook their world." Sarah managed a small smile. Emily was right, last night had cracked something open in Willow Creek. But cracks could widen or close. And Sarah knew her parents wouldn't let this go quietly. As if on cue, the diner's door swung open, and Robert stormed in, his face a mask of barely contained rage. He spotted Sarah and marched over, ignoring the curious eyes of the other patrons. "You think you can humiliate us and walk away?" he said, his voice low but venomous. "This isn't over, Sarah." Emily stood, positioning herself between Sarah and Robert. "You don't get to intimidate her anymore," she said, her voice calm but unyielding. "She's done hiding." Robert's eyes narrowed, but before he could respond, the diner's owner, Mr. Jenkins, approached. "Take it outside, Robert," he said firmly. "This is a place for eating, not arguing." Robert glared but backed off, muttering under his breath as he left. Sarah exhaled, her hands trembling. "He's not going to stop," she said. "No," Emily agreed, sitting back down. "But neither are we." The sheriff's office called later that day, asking Sarah and Emily to come in. When they arrived, Sheriff Daniels, a gruff man with a reputation for fairness, had the folder spread across his desk. "These documents are damning," he said, rubbing his jaw. Your parents committed fraud. Sarah. Forging a death certificate. Accessing your accounts, that's serious. We're looking at charges. But it'll take time to build a case. Sarah nodded, her throat tight. What about my life? My identity? My money, can I get that back? We're working on it, Daniels said. But I'll be honest. It's a mess. Your parents are claiming they acted out of religious conviction. They've got a lawyer. And they're digging in. Emily's jaw tightened. They can't hide behind religion for this. They stole from her. Daniels sighed. I agree. But this town's split. Half the folks think you're a victim, Sarah. The other half think you're stirring up trouble. It's going to get ugly. Sarah had expected that. But hearing it still stung. She thought of Tommy. Of Mrs. Carter. Of the others who'd stood with her. I'm not backing down, she said. I just want my life back. As they left the sheriff's office, Tommy was waiting outside, his backpack slung over one shoulder. I heard you were here, he said, his voice nervous but eager. I've been talking to some people, kids from school. Few others. They want to help. We're starting a group. Like a support thing for people like us. Sarah's eyes widened. A group? Yeah, Tommy said, a shy smile breaking through. Nothing big yet. But we're tired of hiding. You inspired us. Sarah. You and Emily. Emily grinned, nudging Sarah. Told you you're starting something. Over the next few days, Sarah and Emily met with Tommy and a small but growing group of allies, young people who'd felt the same weight of Willow Creek's judgment. Older folks who'd seen enough to know the town needed change. They met in Mrs. Delgado's art studio, a safe space filled with half-finished canvases and the smell of paint. Sarah shared her story, and others shared their stories of fear, shame, but also hope. One evening, as the group brainstormed ways to push back against the town's prejudice, Sarah pulled out Emily's note again. You are enough. Always. She traced the words with her finger, her heart full. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about Tommy. About the quiet girl in the corner who'd admitted she was bi. About every person who'd been told they didn't belong. But the fight was far from won. Sarah's parents were rallying their own support, leaning on the church and their allies to paint Sarah as the villain. Rumors swirled. Some said she was lying. Others that she was possessed. Sarah knew the truth was her shield, but it was a heavy one to carry. As she and Emily left the studio that night, a brick crashed through the window of their car. A note taped to it, leave or pay. Sarah's blood ran cold, but Emily's hand found hers. They're scared, Emily said. That means we're winning. Sarah nodded, but the fear lingered. The town was waking up, but so was its ugliness. She clutched the note from the brick, her resolve hardening. This was her home, and she wasn't leaving. The brick through the car window was a warning, but to Sarah, it was fuel. She and Emily taped a tarp over the shattered glass and drove to the sheriff's office, the threatening note burning a hole in Sarah's pocket. Sheriff Daniels took one look at it and shook his head. This is escalation, he said, his voice grim. I'm assigning a deputy to keep an eye on you too. But Sarah, you need to be careful. Whoever did this isn't playing around. Sarah nodded, her jaw tight. She wasn't naive. She knew her parents' allies, or maybe her parents themselves, were behind it. The town was splitting down the middle, and the fracture was getting violent. Back at their temporary apartment in Nashville, Sarah and Emily sat on the couch, the weight of the day pressing down. Emily traced circles on Sarah's hand, her voice soft. We can leave. You know. Start over somewhere else. You don't have to keep fighting. Sarah looked at her. The woman who'd stood by her through every blow. If I run, they win. They get to keep this town the way it is, scaring people into silence. I can't let that happen. Emily smiled, her eyes shining. I know. I hate seeing you hurt. Sarah pulled her close, their lips meeting in a kiss that felt like a promise. You're why I'm still standing, she whispered. The next day, Sarah met with Mrs. Carter and Mrs. Delgado at the library, where they pored over legal options. The sheriff had confirmed the documents were enough for charges: fraud, theft, and possibly conspiracy, but Sarah wanted more than justice. She wanted her name back, her life back. Mrs. Carter, a retired paralegal, was already drafting paperwork to restore Sarah's identity and reclaim her stolen savings. You've got a strong case, Mrs. Carter said, her eyes sharp. But it'll take time. Your parents are fighting dirty thieves. You got half the church on their side, claiming this is a spiritual battle. Sarah's stomach twisted. They're using God as a weapon again. Mrs. Delgado put a hand on her shoulder. They can try. But you've got people fighting for you too. More than you think. That night, the support group met again. This time at Tommy's house. The group had grown nearly a dozen people now, ranging from teenagers to a retired teacher who'd come out as trans in her 50s. They called themselves the Willow Creek Alliance, a name Tommy had suggested with a shy grin. Sarah felt a surge of pride as she listened to their stories, their plans. They were organizing a public rally, a show of solidarity for Sarah and others like her. But the rally wasn't without risk. The brick incident had shaken Sarah, and she knew her parents' supporters were watching. When she and Emily returned to their car after the meeting, they found the tires slashed. No note this time, just a clear message. Emily's face hardened. They're trying to scare us out of town. Sarah clenched her fists, anger drowning out fear. They don't get to win. The rally was set for the following Saturday, in the town square. Sarah and the Alliance spent days preparing, making signs, spreading the word, and bracing for backlash. The night before, Sarah couldn't sleep, her mind racing with what-ifs. She slipped out of bed, careful not to wake Emily, and opened the folder of evidence again. It wasn't just proof of her parents' lies, it was proof of her survival, her right to exist. At dawn, she found Emily awake, sketching in the dim light. The drawing was of Sarah, standing in the church, her face fierce and radiant. This is how I see you, Emily said, handing her the sketch. Unstoppable. Sarah's throat tightened. She tucked the sketch into her bag, a talisman for the day ahead. The rally was small but powerful. About 30 people gathered, holding signs that read "Love is not a sin" and "Sarah lives." Tommy spoke first, his voice shaking but clear, sharing his own story of hiding who he was. Mrs. Delgado followed, calling for the town to embrace change. When Sarah took the microphone, her heart pounded, but she felt the weight of every person standing with her. I'm not here to divide Willow Creek, she said, her voice carrying across the square. I'm here to ask you to see me, to see us, for who we are. Love doesn't destroy, it builds. And I'm not letting anyone take that from me again. The crowd cheered, but not everyone was supportive. A group of counter-protesters, led by some of her parents' church friends, stood across the street, holding their own signs, "Repent and God's law." Sarah's heart sank, but she refused to look away. Then she saw her mother in the crowd, not with the protesters, but standing alone, her face unreadable. For a moment, their eyes met, and Sarah felt a flicker of something hope. Maybe. Or just longing for the mother she'd once known. The rally ended without violence, but the tension lingered. As Sarah and Emily packed up, Tommy ran over, his face pale. "The sheriff just called. Your parents are turning themselves in." Sarah froze, the words not fully sinking in. "What?" "They're at the station now," Tommy said. "They want to talk to you." Sarah looked at Emily, her heart racing. This was the moment she'd been waiting for or dreading. Either way, it was time to face them. The sheriff's station was cold, the fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows on the linoleum floor. Sarah and Emily sat across from Sheriff Daniels, who looked weary but resolute. "Your parents turned themselves in this morning," he said, leaning back in his chair. "They're admitting to the fraud, forging the death certificate, accessing your accounts. They're claiming it was a moment of weakness, not malice." Sarah's laugh was sharp, hollow. "Weakness? They buried an empty casket to erase me." Daniels nodded, his expression grim. "I know. We've got enough to charge them, Sarah. Fraud, theft, maybe more once the investigation's done. But they asked to see you. Just you." Emily's hand tightened on Sarah's. "You don't have to do this," she said softly. "Not if you're not ready." Sarah took a deep breath, Emily's words grounding her. She thought of the rally, of Tommy's courage, of the alliance's growing strength. She'd come this far, she could face her parents one more time. "I'm ready," she said, her voice steady. In the small interrogation room, Ellen and Robert sat side by side, their faces drawn. Ellen's eyes were red-rimmed, her hands twisting a tissue. Robert's jaw was set, but his usual fire was gone, replaced by something Sarah couldn't quite name: defeat, maybe, or shame. "Sarah," Ellen began, her voice trembling. We didn't mean for it to go this far. We thought we could protect you, bring you back to God." Sarah's chest tightened, but she didn't let herself soften. "You didn't protect me. You erased me. You took my money, my name, my life. As I love Emily." Robert's voice was low, almost a whisper. "We thought you were lost. We thought we could save the family's name." "The family's name?" Sarah's voice rose, sharp with pain. "What about me? Your daughter? Did you ever think about what you were doing to me?" Ellen sobbed, but Sarah pressed on. "You held a funeral. You told everyone I was dead. Do you know what that felt like? To be erased by the people who were supposed to love me." Robert looked away, his hands clenched. Ellen reached out, her hand shaking. "Sarah, I'm sorry. I see now. I see you." Sarah froze. Those words, "I see you," were what she'd wanted for years. But they came too late, weighed down by too much pain. "I needed you to see me when I was 16 and scared," she said, her voice breaking. "I needed you when I told you about Emily. But you chose shame over me." The room was silent, the weight of her words settling over them. Sarah stood, her heart heavy but clear. "I'm not here to forgive you. I'm here to take my life back. And I will." She walked out, Emily waiting just outside the door. They didn't speak, they didn't need to. Emily's arms wrapped around her, and Sarah let herself cry. Not for her parents, but for the girl she'd been, the one who'd thought she'd never be enough. Weeks later, the legal process moved forward. Sarah's parents pleaded guilty to lesser charges. avoiding prison but facing heavy fines and community service. Sarah's identity was restored, her accounts unfrozen, though the money was only a fraction of what she'd lost. It wasn't perfect justice, but it was a start. The Willow Creek Alliance grew, their meetings now drawing dozens. They organized workshops, safe spaces, even a pride event, the first in the town's history. Sarah and Emily stood at the heart of it, their love a beacon for others. Tommy came out to his family, and though it wasn't easy, he had the alliance behind him. Mrs. Delgado's studio became a hub of art and activism, a place where wounds were acknowledged and healing began. One evening, as Sarah and Emily walked through the town square, the church's steeple looming in the distance, Sarah felt a quiet peace. The town wasn't perfect, some would never accept her, and the scars of her family's betrayal would always linger. But she'd reclaimed her life, her truth, and her home. Emily slipped her hand into Sarah's, her voice soft. "You did it. You walked into your own funeral and came out stronger." Sarah smiled. The weight of Emily's note, "You are enough," always still in her heart. "We did it," she said. "And we're not done yet." They kept walking, their steps light, their future unwritten but theirs to shape. Willow Creek was changing, one heart at a time, and Sarah knew she'd been part of that change, not just for herself, but for everyone who'd ever been told their love didn't belong.